join me in giving a huge round of applause to the moderator of this panel, Mr. Alan Chou from Meta.us. And guys, please join me on stage.
All right, thanks for the introduction. Really excited to be here, and it's a real pleasure to actually have, well, I'm gonna put down my water. All right, it's a real pleasure to actually have this illustrious panel of people. If you're not familiar in the gaming industry, this is really a treat, the individuals that we have here. So I'll just introduce them one by one. On the right, we have Antonio Pasalic, right, Head of Operations for Asia for ESL. ESL is one of the biggest organizers of esports in the entire world. They do really, really huge tournaments. If you have a chance, look on your phone and just look at, type in ESL1 and you'll see some pretty amazing pictures. We have Elicia who is the MD of Eliphant. You may know her or know of her events in Singapore like GameStart. So that's been running for the last 3 years now?
4 years.
4 years, and it's the biggest gaming event in Singapore. We've got Oskar Feng, right, who is the CEO of GESC. GESC recently hosted 2 Dota 2. I think I heard some Dota 2 fans in the audience. Yeah? So you might have heard about some of the minors that were taking place in the last couple of months. One was in Thailand, and the other was in Jakarta. Both were really big successes. All right? And we've got Ben Pommeraud, who's the MD for Riot, League of Legends, Singapore and Malaysia. And also, you might have heard about Hyperplay, right? Yes, Hyperplay, which is going to happen in August, actually, here in Singapore. Which is a really, really big esports event that's going to be hosted here in Singapore. So we're going to talk a little bit today about esports, as well as the involvement of brands, how brands can be involved, what's relevant, but I'll set it up by giving some of you a background on esports. Okay, esports is nuts right now. Okay, it is a $1 billion industry, and if you look online and you look at some of the stats for some of these esports events, they're actually rivaling traditional sports now. So it is not a theoretical thing anymore. Esports is mainstream from an audience standpoint. And what's really interesting is some of the brands that have been getting in the last year. I think Tony Fernandez was talking yesterday at Innovfest, right? They actually are very active in esports now. They actually own a team, or a couple of teams. Mercedes has gotten involved, right? Toyota has gotten involved. So a lot of brands are getting in. And I think that's what we're going to talk about at the panel. So the first question is for the panel is with these brands over the last year or 2 years, have you seen more interest from non-endemic brands? And maybe I'll start with Ben here.
Well, hello everyone. I think it's a very interesting moment in time indeed. I was actually speaking here last year, and I think the venue was a bit less packed than today, but there was curiosity about what esports could bring and everything. And in the past, traditionally, we would see more endemic brands, sponsoring esports, like gear manufacturers or computer companies. But now, more and more companies are really interested and are looking at esports as any other sport out there. So I could give you a few examples. The last World Championships of League of Legends in China were sponsored by Mercedes-Benz and L'Oreal. They were our 2 main sponsors. You mentioned Hyperplay. Hyperplay is going to be the biggest esports event in Singapore. It's going to be in the indoor stadium on the 4th of August. And Unilever, through the brand Clear, is coming on board together with Singtel. So we are really seeing brands who are acknowledging the fact that to be an esport athlete, you need to be as trained as any athlete out there. And I think one of the what we are seeing right now is that the viewership we get on esports is, as you said, very similar to traditional sports. And I'm going to share with you one crazy number. I'm amazed myself, but in a few weeks back, we had a League of Legends event called MSI, the Mid-Season Invitational, where a Korean team competed in the finals against a Chinese team. And our peak viewership during that finals was 120 million concurrent viewers.
That's amazing.
Which is actually 10 million more than the Super Bowl. So it's surprising for brands because it happened so fast that, you know, it's hard to believe. And also because, you know, most of the viewership from the Super Bowl is from the United States, which is a market that most brands know well, whereas esports is more, you know, leaning towards the east of the world. And so I think many brands don't really know how to handle that yet, but they are looking at it very seriously. So yeah, we are seeing a big shift.
Okay. How about for ESL globally? Do you see that as well? Brands coming in
globally. I'll immediately start with the conclusion. There's definite rise of non-endemics. Their interest in esports up to the level that companies are approaching in a way that when they need also a bit of a makeover. Right? When they became a bit, you know, the traditional branding, traditional advertising became stale. And the beauty of esports is that esports has this reach, this approach to millennials, right? To 18 to 34, which is the hardest to reach audience, because, you know, all of us mostly here, we have either ad blockers, right? Traditional ads cannot reach us, but the main point in how to brand, how to, you know, push your brand together with esports is authenticity. That's the main point. You need to build something that's authentic, that will resonate with players, with viewers, with supporters, be casual or really hardcore. So this is bringing in a certain level, high level of authenticity, and I believe this is the future of marketing itself, and esports can provide this in the best way possible.
That's awesome. And then kind of bringing it closer into home in SEA, as I know much of the audience is from this part of the world. Oskar, tell us about, you know, the events and the brands that were participating with you in GESC.
Yeah, I think for sure non-endemic brands, and non-endemic brands in, you know, just like car companies, consumer goods companies, telcos, e-commerce brands, all getting into esports now, shows obviously the development of the industry as well as the brands' desire to get into the millennial group. But I think it also comes from the fact that more and more, especially in this region, in Southeast Asia, which is kind of lagged behind the other parts of the world, like US, Europe, China, a little bit, it shows that there are now actual professional level events that these brands find worthy getting into. I think that's what our events in Indonesia and Thailand represented, just like what ESL has done in Manila and Genting in the past, certainly with Hyperplay coming up as well. These are world-class, professional-grade events produced by people who really know what they're doing. You're not just in the little LAN centers anymore. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but the truly big brands, like the brands that we were able to get in Indonesia, like, you know, some of the biggest consumer goods brands, pro gamers, Ticket.com, e-commerce. In Thailand, we were able to get Chou, the biggest telco in the country, Grab as sponsors. These are not companies that want to just invest in small grassroots level events. They want the big impact, and I think it says a lot about where esports is in 2018 in Southeast Asia, where brands like that are willing to come in to sponsor these events.
And, you know, to add up to that, I think it's not just about brands. I think for a very long time, and the gamers out there probably know that there was a social stigma against gaming. You know, it was hard to be a gamer in a way because your parents were not necessarily approving it. Your friends might be saying, "Oh, wow, you are a gamer." And from a brand perspective, some brands didn't necessarily want to associate themselves to that. And I think one of the key changes that we're seeing right now is that institutions are recognizing gaming and esports. So, you know, a few examples. Recently, the Olympic Committee of Asia recognized esports as first demonstration sport and then a medal activity in the next Asian Olympics. So this year in 2018 in Jakarta, we're having the Asian Games, and League of Legends, among other games, are going to be here as part of the competition. Here in Singapore, the Hyperplay event that we are organizing is actually endorsed by MCCY, the Ministry of Youth here in Singapore, as well as 9 other governments in the region. So it's really a big change because it shows that esports, gaming as a sector or an activity are recognized now and are accepted. And I think from a brand perspective, it's also like a very good sign that you can go ahead. It's fine to really show gamers, which are, as you say, very large parts of the community between 15 and 35-year-old, that you are supporting their passion. So I think we have all that convergence of factors coming in right now, and it's a very, very exciting time.
It is exciting, and I'm glad you make reference to Singapore, because I also want to hear more from Elicia, GameStart, and some of the other activities that you've been doing in Singapore. Are you seeing local brands also getting in?
So I think we've definitely seen a big change. Since we started 4 years ago, the landscape was very different. There was a lot less interest in gaming in general, and especially esports was still relatively new. Over the years, we're seeing a lot of both local brands as well as big international brands, both what we call endemic, which is your PC brands and the guys who are directly related to the industry, and the non-endemics, which is your F&B brands, your energy drinks, your car brands and everything. We're definitely seeing a huge shift, and there's a lot more interest now, even for GameStart, which is a Singapore-focused event. And yes, more and more local companies, because I think we provide a platform for the local companies to showcase a lot of their products and a lot of the fact that they're in gaming. So I think earlier when Ben mentioned about it's difficult being a gamer, that's definitely true. There were a lot of, I think, stereotypes and perspectives that were challenging to be a gamer and to come out and say that you're a gamer. But the landscape right now is you can be very proud and say, I play games, I watch esports, it's cool. So yeah, it's very different.
Yeah, but I just wanted to add that the brands that are coming in that recognize the opportunity in esports, they're here for the long term, right? On a global scale, we have some partners that are with us for more than 10 years, working year after year on positioning themselves in the esports world. This just continues also now in the Asian market, right? These brands are also following us with our strategy. As we move, they move with us to the certain market. And that's also one of the beauty of it, that it's a long-term partnership. It's not just, okay, let's do a bang, let's take what we can. It's really thought through strategy from the brands, and they stick to it.
Can I share something? For brands, one of the key factors about why would you support esports is that, as you mentioned earlier, roughly 80% of the people who watch esports are between 15 and 35 years old, which is unique. If you take any other sport out there, the only one that's a bit close to that in terms of demographics is basketball, where you have roughly 1/3 of the viewers who are in that demographics. The rest is older. But what's crazy is not that. What's crazy is that 50% of the esports viewers don't watch any other sport on the TV or online, or they don't care. Their passion is competitive gaming. So basically, if you don't support esport as a brand, you miss out on 50% of a demographic of a generation, and it's a generation, which means that maybe it's new, but me personally, 10 years down the line, maybe I will watch esports game with my kids, I will go to the stadium and I will support RNG, a Chinese team, because that's the way things are changing. And which is why, as a brand, if you involve yourself now with a long-term perspective, you can show that audience, which is educated, hard to catch, as you said, you can show that you are just here sitting next to them, empowering their passion in a more subtle way. Because I think what's hard for brands right now is that the way you should engage with an esports audience might be slightly different from the way they used to do it in traditional sports event, which was mostly show me your logo.
So I think it's safe to say this panel is very bullish on esports, and we're getting actually, and you guys are doing a great job because we're getting questions, and I've been reading them, and I think, you know, trying to categorize some of these is you've got this momentum here in esports right now, but let me throw out, maybe this is a tough question, but I think it's relevant to the audience here. Someone was asking, you know, what are some of the things that could derail esports? And I think with regards to brands, I've been reading articles about how difficult it is right now for brands to maybe measure the ROI, right, on their investment into esports, because the stats aren't exactly uniform. It's not like we have a Nielsen thing where, you know, there counts eyeballs and stuff like that. I'll throw it to the panel. What do you think are the challenges? And like, if you're a brand, how should I be measuring this investment I'm making?
I think, I'll be blunt, I think that marketers and brands need to get a bit more modern with their way of thinking, especially when it comes to esports. I think, you know, you mentioned Nielsen. There are, Nielsen is able to measure these eyeballs right now. I think they're getting more sophisticated about it. I think the fundamental thing is that marketers need to get in the mindset of understanding how young people enjoy their content, whatever that content is. And for the most part now, for a huge swath of them, it is esports. How do you measure streaming numbers? You know, it's not like marketers are 100% accurate when they measure TV numbers either. But so I think having some rudimentary understanding of how you measure eyeballs on streams, how long on average people spend watching your content, your logos, your ads, I think is really important. I think that the other thing is they need to actually go to, I think marketers, when they, let's say they want to sponsor a sporting event, I think most people kind of have an understanding of what a sporting event looks like and feels like, but if you've never been to a top-level esports event or tournament, it's hard to have that emotional understanding of how important these kinds of events are for the fans, how passionate they get about it, and if you go as a marketer, it's a lot easier to make the case internally about like, wow, this is what it looks like, this is how it feels, this is, maybe that's a bit more soft, but I think for a lot of marketers that's really important because in marketing, a lot of it is telling the story, and then you support it with numbers. So if you're able to have that emotional understanding and back it up with a more sophisticated understanding of how young people actually enjoy content today, that's how brands can become more successful and, you know, not derail their entry into esports.
So they should go to an event and actually see the passion.
I mean, you can go or you can watch, but I don't think anyone's investing in the FIFA World Cup without any understanding of what that event looks like. You know, like a company that invests in a golf event, they know what these events look like. But if you don't know what an esports event is like and how truly passionate the fans are, how can you responsibly go in and feel that you're going to get the most out of it?
I want to bring Antonio back into this because you mentioned something earlier, and maybe you can share a little. You said authenticity, and I think we all agree that is really key to marketing to them. Maybe you could talk a little bit about authenticity as well as, you know, how you see brands using that.
Of course. I just wanted to continue a bit on what Oskar just said. Attending the event itself is converting people, actually. I'm getting a lot of questions when I meet someone, okay, well, you work with esports, what is it? I stopped explaining it by words. What I do, I just take my phone out and show some like short video, the finals or, you know, the reception of the trophy from our events. And then people they realize, okay, this is huge, right? There's emotions, there's so much passion there. And this continues into authenticity. What we talked about, like what we all in the industry are talking a lot now is, and we all agree mostly, that to be authentic, you need to show as a brand that you're tackling every level of, let's say, competition, right? Not just the big events that are happening that we're organizing on a grand scale, you know, so you have your, I don't know, 40,000 people, you know, support that only, and that's the end. Because the event itself doesn't last that long, right? For a couple of days, you have a little bit traction before, a little bit after, but if you're continuously supporting esports from the grassroots, players showing that you care, showing that it's not just, okay, I'm gonna throw my logo there, show that you're connected with the content, they're willing, you know, to create content, that you're not being aggressive, too pushy, that you're just there going along with, you know, presenting something that people want to see in the esports world, the gamers, the followers, the people who are passionate about it. If you go along that, if you're following the community, and if you're starting from the grassroots, like I said, that's the proper way, that's the proper strategy to follow. Of course, you can follow all the niches of it, you know, from the first level that starts with the community up to, you know, the grand events equivalent of world championships.
Thanks. Question for the panel. Is there a brand, a non-endemic brand, that you would name and say, these guys are really approaching it correctly, both from a long-term perspective, from an authenticity perspective? Is there a brand? Because I think the audience would love to, you know, research more if there's this particular brand.
Well, Mercedes is one of our partners, long-term partners, right? That is following us on every level of our journey across the world. So they do, you know, they're sponsoring on the ESL Play, which is our starting point of anyone who wants to enter the game of esports through us, up to live events, up to leagues that are happening online, you know, cups, tournaments, then up to, you know, the grandiose events where there was just recently made and presented in Genting in the beginning of the year, this commercial where Mercedes actually tackled with us the perception that esports and gamers have, you know, so they reversed it, because there are expectations from a young person who's a gamer to be, you know, to start getting a real job, to get married, to be professional, not to play games, because still it's a perception that gaming is something that's not serious, and that there is no money in gaming, that's just something, if you do something for fun and you're getting money out of it, it's not a real thing. Mercedes kind of, look at that video. I don't want to self-promote that much, but like, look at that video, ESL and Mercedes, if you have a chance to see how they played on the stale opinions that they're performed in public before about esports. That's a very good example of that.
I would just put to look at Red Bull and Monster, energy drink brands. So Red Bull especially has been very focused on the authentic component of esports, right? They do the big event sponsorships, but they also do the grassroots things. They engage with players. They sponsor their own players, and they not only just stick a logo on a jersey, but they actually groom and support the players that they sponsor to push them further, to help them, you know, achieve what they want to achieve in the esports realm. So I would look at that brand as well as an example. And actually, just circling a little bit back to what we were talking about earlier, I think brands need to first understand what they want to achieve out of esports, and also understand that this is a long-term investment. You know, like Antonio was saying, you can't just sponsor one event, stick your logo on it, and think that, oh, okay, great, I'm esports. It doesn't work that way. And I personally think that you need a mix of the grassroots level stuff as well as the big international tournaments, because that's how gamers are going to know that you're really invested in the scene, you're invested in what they are passionate about, and you cover, you know, from the beginning to the big stuff. So I think the important thing for any brand who wants to get into esports is understanding the audience, understanding where your brand and your product stands in relation to this audience, and the kind of investment and the kind of ROI that you want to achieve out of it in the long term.
You know, I think sponsorship is an investment indeed. It's something you do in the long term, but it's a small investment compared to any other sport out there. Like Super Bowl, typically 30 seconds of ads is $5 million US. We are quite far from that in esports. So for a brand, it's typically a great blue ocean. It's an opportunity to explore new ways of engaging people. Simple example, in traditional sports or sponsorship clients, brands ask for eyeballs, and then their agency will provide them ratings or a number of eyeballs given by, TV stations or Nielsen. And it's an estimate of the reach, actually. It's not always very accurate. But we're talking about television, which is a passive watching of content. If you want to watch esports, you need to turn on your computer or take your mobile phone. You need to go to a URL. You need to tune in. And then you're active, you participate, you talk. So the quality of the engagement is much different. And we are engaging in a process where the brands are getting more educated and sensible to what it means, that qualitative engagement. And I think us also, we are, traditionally, Riot Games, we make games. We don't do sports, but now we are entering that sector. So we are also learning how to convey that value to brands. And I think we still have progress to make on our side.
So we are running low on time, but I do want to, there's such good questions here. We could probably sit here for hours answering some of these questions, but I think there is a theme here in some of these questions, which is about the SEA region and esports here and how it not only grows but sustains. And it's a very good question, and I wanted to, as kind of the last wrap up, bring it home again to our home region. What do you think is missing or is acquired, or is, how do we grow the SEA esports? What are the things that we need to see?
I have a good idea about that. I think it's like any other sport. It's an ecosystem. And in an ecosystem, you have authorities, you have fans, you have sponsors, you have teams, and we need all that. I think the social acceptance is coming now. So we have government supporting. We have actually a lot of gamers who are now parents, so they are understanding that gaming is not necessarily a toxic activity. It can be a very good activity. What we need now, we need strong teams that can actually make a living out of gaming. And we need to build all the little steps that are below that you can find in traditional sports. Like if you take Chelsea Football Club, they have their good teams that everybody knows, but they have clubs for toddlers everywhere in the world, and it builds that sustainable ecosystem. So we need to do all that work, which I think you are contributing to. So we are getting there, and I think if we can show through like events like the ones we are organizing that there is a demand for that, it's going to go very fast, because Southeast Asia is by far the fastest growing region in the world when it comes to gaming.
I completely agree. I mean, it's the fastest growing region in the world, but it's not like it's small. It's already massive here. The amount of 30 million gamers or something like that in the region. I think we need in every part of the value chain, whether you are a publisher, the government, event organizers, league organizers, and down to sponsors and teams, is long-term commitment to the region, not only to grow it, but to really do right by the entire ecosystem. I think going back to one of the points earlier about which brands are really doing well in esports, I totally agree. Mercedes, Red Bull, and I think most of those are driven not from Southeast Asia, right? I think those conversations, the way that you package these stories around esports, are just beginning now for brands here in the region. And when we talk to them as GESC, we encourage them. Yes, look at what Mercedes is doing, look at what Red Bull is doing and other companies, and be able to tell this story, but on a local area, whether it's within the country or within the region, and through that convey to the fans in these countries around the region that we are long-term committed to it. That's the things that, you have to remember that esports is extremely young as an industry still. In its modern state, maybe like 10 years old. You can't expect it to become absolutely mainstream overnight, but in fact it's kind of become that way, and I think now it's imperative for every party in the value chain to continue that.
Yep, I agree with that. Just to follow up, the ecosystem is still very young. There are many, many different components, I think, that we still need to grow. There's also a lot of, excuse me, a lot of education, I think. A lot of companies that I come across are very interested in esports, but the same thing is, what exactly is it? What can I do with it? How can I work with it to reach this audience that I want to reach? So I think companies, need to start asking more questions, start understanding the industry, what exactly it means, because I think it's only going to grow and it's only going to get bigger. And I think the rest of us all, from stakeholders to governments to private individuals, all do need to play a part to grow each aspect of it.
Agreed. And I would say that hopefully this panel has helped with that process of education. I know that all of you will be here for the next couple hours at least. So feel free to grab any of these individuals who are really domain experts, and they can hopefully answer some of your questions that didn't get answered. So thank you for attending, and thank you to the panel.
Thank you. Oh, okay. Hey, thank you so much.